Hey, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm from an old Arizona family, so you may be wondering what the heck is the Navy doing here talking about the maritime strategy in Phoenix. So part of what I wanted to talk to y'all here first about is that the Navy is engaged in all 50 states for all American citizens 24 hours a day. So we may not be here, you may not see us here, but we're out, as Jason was saying, we're out on the high seas, we're out in the open waters, protecting trade lanes, protecting the nation, and putting our nation's interests forward across the area. And I do want to talk in some areas that'll specifically potentially hit here, because as Jason was putting, so as I got here, he said, this is a place for geeks. And I said, that's awesome, because the Navy, I want to let you know where the opportunities, and you probably already know where a lot of them are, as far as in the Navy and in the Armed Forces, because there's some great things where we need skilled and talented people like everybody in here who is, if that's something you choose to do. But with that, let me just, I want to give you a little, and then I'll go around. They told me not to walk around. They always, don't do this, don't do that. No spitting, no fighting, no chewing gum. And I'll try to stay close to the podium as I can, but I might walk around a little bit, just to keep them on their toes. First of all, the Navy is here for Navy Week because what we want to do, we want to reach out to the citizens of the United States and let you know what the Navy's doing for you, because at the end of the day, you are my boss. My wife is #1 boss, but the American people are the boss of the Armed Forces and the Navy. So we want to let you know a little bit about what we're doing, things that are going on day in and day out that are kind of routine, but at the end of the day, there's some 18 to 22-year-olds, because that's the meat of the Navy sailor, out there doing some pretty dangerous things, but are routine because of the way they're trained up and how we go forward here. About 4% of the sailors in the Navy come from Arizona. So when you do the public math on that, you know, that's a little bit more than what ought to be coming from Arizona, since there's no major bodies of water around here. I came from here. My grandparents were born in the territory of Arizona. They were up around the Jerome area at the early part of the previous century, and then they moved down here to around Buckeye, and Buckeye wasn't what it is today. So Buckeye used to be they were cotton farmers out in that area of that land there. So and then he after Pearl Harbor joined. They had a big. This is how the Navy recruits people. There was a big billboard on. I don't think they had any. I didn't think they had a loop back then, but someplace in downtown Phoenix, they had a big billboard of a Marine F-4U fighter plane landed, and my dad said, I want to fly that. So that's how he joined the Navy, came back here to Arizona after the war, and then got recalled for Korea, and then ended up staying in. And so I grew up in a Navy family and just wanted to be in there. Just so you know, too, Arizona is one of our highest recruiting grounds for Navy SEALs, which is another thing how does that happen? Now, I don't think we're going to recruit a lot of Navy SEALs out of here. But there are some areas where I'm involved in right now. I'm on what's called the Joint Staff now. And part of what we do is we train all our forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and we have fairly large exercises. And what part of my job is not as a Navy Admiral, but as a senior officer in the military, making sure that the way we train people in the Pacific is not exactly the same, but close enough to how we train people in Europe and in the Mideast and others in a lot of key areas. And the two key areas that I'm involved in is cyber warfare and ballistic missile defense. And those two have an intersection in themselves when it goes there. In fact, Arizona has a connection to ballistic missile defense in that Raytheon has a big factory down in Tucson, Boeing's here, Lockheed Martin's here, and they're all part of the ballistic missile defense architecture that this nation has put together. I don't think anybody, or most people in this room, weren't born when President Reagan gave the infamous Star Wars speech, but that actually happens. I was just telling a group that when President Reagan gave what was called the Star Wars speech, the Strategic Defense Initiative, back in 1982, I think it was, they said, "Mr. President, do you really think this is going to work?" And he said, "Well, there's only two people who have to think it's going to work, me and President Gorbachev." And at the end of the day, both of them thought it was going to work. And if you don't, I don't know if you recall, a couple years ago, we had a satellite tumbling, it was a U.S. satellite tumbling toward the Earth. It had a tank of benzene on it, which is the gas, which is how it was the fuel for the satellite. And it was what happens when satellites get in, if we don't get everything right, then they're coming into the Earth's orbit because of gravity. And so we didn't know where it was going to go. And the trajectory, it's pretty hard saying where a satellite's going to fall. Since 70% of the Earth's surface is water, usually it's not a problem. But there was some impact areas that were going to be in highly populated areas, and we didn't want that to happen. And so in a very short order, in very close quarters, we developed and designed how to shoot that satellite with a missile from a U.S. Navy ship. And when you get to the engineers that made that happen in less than 90 days from when we knew it was going to hit, that is just phenomenal. Now, when you get to the perfectionists, it wasn't perfect because they hit it 37 degrees off where they thought they were going to hit. But and just so you know, there aren't any explosions in outer space. You have to hit it. So you're hitting something in outer space going at those speeds. So you're hitting a bullet with a bullet in outer space at tremendous velocities. That is the type of intellect that this nation has, and that's the type of intellect that the people in this room have here. And that's where I want to talk to you about some of the opportunities that are in the Navy and in the other services here. So, but that also goes back to some innovations that are less than, you know, rocket science or things that take there. So the Navy, this year we're celebrating the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812. And during the War of 1812, there weren't that many states, and they're all on the East Coast. And I think at that point, Arizona was part of New Mexico, or Spanish territory back here. But during that time, there were some innovations that took place with the Navy that at the time were basic, you know, these were things that were high tech. So we have, I don't know if anybody's heard, there's a ship, the oldest ship we still have, the oldest ship in commissioned service in the water is the USS Constitution. Well, the USS Constitution was part of 6 ships that this nation first built because we're a maritime nation and we rely on the free exercise of goods on the open oceans of the world going around and being able to trade goods. And that's what was constricting us from Britain. They were trying to hold us. And so they kind of flared up again in the War of 1812. And when you get to the ships we had then, it's like nothing has changed. Because the first, nothing's changed because admirals are throwing stuff around here. They have, in those first 6 ships, authorized by Congress, there was a big fight. So they were all made in different states. And so each state got every shipyard. So we built one in Philadelphia, we built one in Boston, we built one in Norfolk, we built one in Charleston, we built one in New York City, so all up and down. And as you can see, none of that has changed. And then it was way over budget. And so they said, oh no, this is that, you know, that, and so they're over budget. And so what did they do? These were 44 gun frigates, and they said, well, instead of making the last 3 44, we're going to make them 36 because that'll save money. And so you can see there's a corollary to things that are going on. So nothing has changed in 200 years. And then the other thing, but when you get to the innovation and then the technology piece, the innovation that those ships had were, one is the tactics that the Navy took, because we were not as powerful as the Royal Navy, but we were trained better. However, they had bigger ships. So we designed our ships that they could take on a superior Royal Navy ship, but if more than one showed up, we had to be faster to get out of there. So basically, any ship, any foe that we couldn't beat, we had to be faster than. And so we designed the ships. We knew which ships, you know, the big 88 gun men of war from Britain, we could outsail them. And the way they're designed, they can sail higher on the wind and those type of things. And then we had the space age material that did this. And now we have and the space age material we used for those ships was live oak from the swamps of Georgia. In fact, it was so secretive that it was forbidden to export live oak from this nation. It was controlled by Congress because it was such, the material was so hard, and the British ships, they'd kind of denuded the forests in Europe at the time, and so they were making their ships out of fur and not as hard a wood, and the live oak from the swamp, whoever had to go in there, I feel sorry for them, because there were a lot of mosquitoes, there still are in the swamplands of Georgia, and they got in there, and that's where the USS Constitution got her nickname Old Ironsides. It wasn't because of there's some copper sheathing on her. That just keeps all the stuff in the ocean from growing on the hull as fast. And that makes her a little bit faster. But what made her more powerful was the live oak, because it's so gnarled up, and the chemical way that's put together, she could get in closer and take the hits from the British guns, and they would just bounce off. And so we could get in closer, conserve ammunition, and then being more accurate, go in and take on the British. So that's just a little vignette to say things change, but they don't change much over 200 years. It's kind of the same way here. Let me talk to you a couple little things on cyberspace and cyber and a few things there, and then I'll open up for some questions, and then I know we have some time, and I want to leave mainly for discussions from viewpoint there, but as when we talk about cyber, it's a very misunderstood area. I had the opportunity a couple years ago to run a counter-piracy task force off of Somalia for 6 months. I was supposed to do it for 3 months, but I forgot to ask who my follow-on was, and I ended up following on myself. So I got to spend 6 months off of there. But during that, there's a couple things that relates to most people in this room. Because most people in this room have grown up with smartphones, cell phones, have grown up with the internet. That's commonplace. Well, when you get to the continent of Africa, electricity and clean water isn't common there. However, there's been almost a skip in technology. They don't have wired phones. They have cell phones. So Somalia, which is, it's not even a country, it's an area on the map with no functioning government and no functioning legal system since 1991. It is an ungoverned space of land with the largest coastline in Africa. It's an immense nation. However, your 19-year-old Somali has one of these, and with this, you have better cell phone capability than President Reagan did in 1983. That's what information technology and the information age has done. And if that person, whether he's doing good things or bad things, has a smartphone, and he's hooked up to some Google apps, he has more information available to him or her than President Clinton did in his first administration. That's just astounding. So when you get to just 15 years ago or so, the amount of information that's available to you today and everybody else in here through this and through the World Wide Web and how we go, that's where the people in this room with the brain power, you're going to be having to design solutions to problems that we don't even know exist today, with technologies that may not be invented for another 5 or 10 years, because you all are going to have to be responsible for. And I'm not smart enough to do it. I still think this is how you dial a telephone. That's how we're done. Yeah, most people don't know what that. If I tell this to my kids, what is that, Dad? And so that's the kind of charge that you all have here, and I think the great institution here has laid a good foundation for you to be able to move in that. Whether you go into the military or you support the government or you go off in other areas, I just ask that you do it for good things, because that technology, there's a lot of bad people doing things out there. There's a lot of people that use this for malicious intent. It's a well-known fact, and it's in open source, that the people who have murdered and killed people in bombings in East Africa and in India use Google Maps and communicate. And that's how they do not only the planning, but the operations in there. And also they get, there's ways of, who's been on Second Life? Anybody in Second? What's your avatar look like?
Not like me.
Not like you, yeah. Boy, yeah. So you pick a nice avatar, but in Second, do most people, everybody know what Second Life is? Yes. Okay, y'all know what that is. Okay. Well, Second Life is also a communication medium for people doing bad things. Second Life is also a financial network for people that are doing bad things. But you all here, because of how smart you are, you're a lot smarter than me. I'm just a dumb pilot. But you all in here, I never would have qualified to get into this university. But you all in here would be able to design the things to help pull that back. Because our nation, each and every day, is being attacked from the outside. Now, it's not a traditional attack, but people are coming in. They're trying to get in our bank accounts. They're trying to get in here. And who saw, I think it was in December, it was a SCADA system for a water plant in Omaha. You see that?
Yeah. Yeah, I watched that pretty closely.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Pretty interesting, yeah. It's pretty scary.
Yeah, very scary.
Yeah, so those are types of, I mean, and that's just the stuff we can talk about in here. I mean, there's a lot of much more scary stuff. I've heard people talk that you have, that the true cyber attacks, there really haven't been that many. Because a cyber attack has to damage something, has to do some malicious intent. There's something really critical. And sometimes, some of the things that have happened have just been groups, not, groups doing things that they're checking something out and they didn't control it. So there was a system in Brazil down in an electrical plant, another SCADA system down there that went haywire and actually hurt people down there because it's in a power plant, and power plants are kind of dangerous places. Everybody's probably heard of Stuxnet. Yeah, I don't know anything. I've not read into any of that stuff. I'm just glad it worked, type of thing. And if that holds back some things, maybe that's good or bad. And people know that when the country of Georgia, they had, when you put the bots out there, they kind of marshal out in cyberspace, and all of a sudden they get a signal to start doing some denial of service attacks, and that's really not a cyber attack. It's just when you're doing denial of service, and then just during one of the curiosities of life, that just happened to be when the Russian army came in over the border. I don't know, that just I'm sure it was pure coincidence. that happened that way. But you can see what would happen if things got much worse. And our nation, luckily, is at the top of the class when you get to cyber defense, cyber network attack, and all across the spectrum. However, we don't want to be getting to where we want it. If you get to my term, I haven't, when people get out, we don't want to get to where we're trading blows in cyber. Because it's almost like the dawn of the nuclear age when I was growing up. You know, you don't want to be trading nuclear missiles back and forth. And at some level, cyber attacks can be just as severe because they will shut down, you know, economies. They'll shut down petroleum distribution. They will shut down our way of life very quickly because we're so reliant on the free flow of commerce and goods, not only on the water and the land, but also through the networks of the banking system and all that work. So that's where you all can be very helpful. Again, I ask you to do it for good. So here's I am getting a trick question here. Actually, it's not a trick question. It's a quiz. So here in Arizona, how many days of refined gasoline are there at any one point?
No.
7.
How many days of fuel?
7.
For the entire
For
state?
what? For people?
Yeah, for people.
For people?
7.
48
Maybe
hours.
less.
It's about 72 hours, give or take. So if something happened in the port of Long Beach, and that is a key entry node to the west coast of the United States, because that's where most of the refined petroleum between Waco, Texas, and every place west, if anything happened, earthquake, tsunami, cyber attack, whatever, make sure your gas tank's filled up, because there's only about 3 days of refined petroleum at any given time on the west coast, because we rely on just consuming it, and it keeps flowing, these type of things there. And if you recall last year, I'm not a sociologist, but I don't think if we ran out of refined petroleum that this country would look like Japan, where people were politely lining up in line to get it. I went through the gas crisis in the early 70s in high school, and I was cutting people out of line, and we had whatever your zip code was on Tuesday, and then your phone number on Wednesday, it was all sorts of goofy stuff. So we rely more on the free flowing goods there, and so that's where we're going to have to make sure what we don't want to do is even get there. But that's where our economy, when you think here in Arizona, why do I have a Navy Admiral talking to me? It's because we rely on the imports of good into this nation and the export of goods. So we bring in those goods and we refine them here. In fact, there was a chemical tanker in the Gulf. It just happened to have an explosion. It wasn't anything that was malicious, but it carries the chemical that you refine the summer grade of gasoline with. So you MPDD or whatever that stuff is. And so they bring that in, they have to mix it for a summer grade of gasoline. And that's one ship isn't gonna affect anything, but a whole bunch of them will. So when we have to bring that stuff in, we refine a lot of fuel actually here. We bring in the raw products. And depending on where the oil is from and those type of things. I'd like to open up for questions here. Do I have time for? I have time for questions. Any questions? Yeah, in the back.
Yeah.
Am I doing okay standing at the podium, by the way? Okay.
All right. All this computer and cyber stuff is really interesting, but I want to hear about high seas piracy.
Great. I could be here till 6 o'clock doing
All
that.
right, well, let's do it. How sophisticated is piracy off Somalia in the region, and how big of a threat is it?
Okay, 2 questions. And these are not remarks that are condoned or endorsed by the United States Navy or anybody in the United States. I'll give you my personal opinion. Not endorsed by anybody, and definitely not endorsed by the international maritime community. So when you go through where I was, off the coast of Somalia, the reason we're there, because Somalia is a dysfunctional state. And is basically an ungoverned area that you can get a ship. Here's the business plan. You get aboard a ship, you hold the people hostage, you bring it down to beautiful little anchorage off of Habyo or Isle, Somalia. You hold them, and you'll get, when I first started off, a couple $1 million. Now you'll probably get $7-8 million. And by the way, that's 2 Cessna caravans fully loaded with money. That's how they get it there. And they hold them because nobody's going to get them. There's no authority to go in there and pull the ships out. And if you go try to get them, they'll just kill people. So there's no intention to let the people get murdered, because the pirates have shown again and again they'll murder people. Life in that area of the world is not worth very much. They'll just murder people. And the average Somali male has a life expectancy, I think, 37.5 years. So what do they have to live for anyways? So life is cheap, and they're willing to kill people and do very bad things to people for a little bit of money. That's their motivation, money. So that being said, in the Gulf of Aden, that's where 25,000 ships a year go through, mainly oil and consumer products coming from the Arabian Gulf, the oil, consumer products coming from the Far East, coming through the Straits of Malacca under the southern coast of India, up a little bit, and then down through the Gulf of Aden. And it is 25,000 ships. It's a ship every 42 minutes, just going through. Whiz bang. It's the most heavily trafficked area on the planet. And there's a lot of cars, iPads, all the stuff rolling through there each and every day. How sophisticated is it? Not very. You have typical Somali attack group, pirate attack group, is you have 2 boats, about 11-meter little craft. They use 40 horsepower Yamaha engines. And you might ask, why 40 horsepower Yamaha engines? Right? Why 40? I'm glad you asked. Because if you put 2 of them on there, you can go about 30 knots. And you can catch anything that's going through there. Because a ship going through there, it goes between 12 and 18 knots, something like that there. And the other thing is, I asked the pirates, why Yamaha? Why 40 horsepower? And it was 2 things. Yamahas never break. So I don't own any stock in Yamaha Corporation, but if I was getting an outboard, I'd buy a Yamaha because it's fully endorsed by the Somali pirates. The other thing is, takes no training to operate it. So would take you, of the 4 people on the boat, I'm not saying you're the lowest common denominator, but let's just say you were the lowest common denominator. It would take me about 5 minutes to teach you how to operate the Yamaha 40 horsepower. And you'd be able to fuel it, start it, and get it going. There's no training program. Same reason why, by the way, in the Army, they've used not an Apple iPhone, but they use the Droid system, because for everybody in here, it comes with about 2,000 hours of embedded training with it, because everybody knows how to use one of these. That's why the U.S. Army uses a Droid. One, because it kind of operates in there, but all the soldiers know how to work it. So, but a Somali teenager doesn't grow up knowing how to use an outboard engine. Somalia has the longest coastline in Africa, and they don't eat a lot of fish. So the reason I know is I asked them. I said, hey, there's more tuna, yellowfin tuna off the coast of Somalia than you can believe. I used to fly between ships, 10, 11 miles at a whack, and there would be tuna jumping the entire time. Tuna, whales, sea turtles. I mean, Jacques Cousteau would have a great time, because nobody's there because the pirates are there. Marine life is just all over the place. So it doesn't take much. There's no intelligence network in that they select a specific ship, select a specific type of ship. What they do, personal opinion, is select ships that aren't taking precautions. So when you have 25,000 ships a year. If you have one there, whoop, that one's doing, then you just wait another 42 minutes and there'll be another ship. So I liken it to a shopping mall at Christmas. If you go there after dark and you just start pulling door handles, somebody will have forgotten to lock their car, and then that's an opportunity target, and then somebody will have left a purse or a laptop or Christmas gifts. That's all the Somali pirates are doing as far as I know, because there's no, again, they have a cell phone, 2 AK-47s, maybe a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, 2 Yamaha 40 horsepowers, and a ladder. A ladder is the key to get aboard. So I had the authorities under United Nations Security Council resolutions 1849 and 1851. I was allowed to deter and disrupt and suppress the piracy off the coast of Somalia, and it was also I could confiscate pirate paraphernalia, which that is a real legal term in UN jargon. So I was allowed to grab their GPS, I could grab their cell phones, because if you pull a little SIM chip off of here, there's a lot of good info on that thing. And you can do the family and friends network by figuring out. And, oh, you've been calling Abdul, I see. And, oh, you've been calling down there. And you can also see where this has been. There's geo points on here. And you can, by taking the waypoints out there, however, I had to have, you had to be reasonable doubt, I had to be on reasonable doubt that they were in the act of not piracy, because piracy is a well-defined legal term. You actually have to be physically touching the ship or shooting at it where the shots hit the ship. So what we worked on was bringing it a little bit in closer, and so we would intercept them. That's the deter and disrupt piece. And so I never took anybody as under custody, because there was no nation that was going to prosecute them. But what I did, we got a lot of they just throw their AK-47s in the water. Sometimes they'd throw their cell phones, sometimes they wouldn't, so we go collect those. And then the main thing was ladders. I didn't realize until after a while how hard it is to get a ladder in Somalia, because there's not like a Home Depot there. And there's really no reason to have an aluminum ladder in Somalia other than be a pirate. Right? There really isn't. There is no reason to have an aluminum ladder. And the reason you need an aluminum ladder is because it's lightweight. And you can make one out of wood, but it's too heavy. And so you have to be able to get it up and put 2 hooks on it and get it on a ship. And you can use a grappling hook. And grappling hooks look a lot like anchors in that part of the world, because it's just a big fish hook looking thing. But when you get down to it, grappling hooks are actually it takes a lot of upper body strength to do that. And it's, you got to be a pretty good athlete to do that. And if you've ever seen a picture of your typical Somali pirate, these aren't, there's not a lot of upper body strength there. They can do it, some of them can, but that's not the preferred method. And, it's pretty hard when you're moving at 10 or 12 knots to do it. So, long-winded answer to your question, I think it's pretty low tech. I had people, conspiracy theorists, thought they tracked certain ships. I don't think so. I think they were just, I think the maritime community wasn't, every ship, I was out there for 6 months and 3 ships got pirated. The only ships that got pirated were not doing the proper security measures, meaning having people on watch, that you can have fire hoses charged and spraying water as you're going through. You go through at night. You keep your speed up. If something happens, you start fishtailing, because that puts a wake, and that makes it hard for them to go through there. So it's actually hard. The actual percentage of between attacks and successful piracy is actually kind of low. It just it kind of makes itself into the news. Back there.
So you said that you were part of the CJTF on the Horn of Africa?
I was part of what's called CTF, Commander Task Force 151, which was, I had a specific mandate to deter, disrupt, suppress piracy off the coast of Somalia, but I could go any place in the Indian Ocean or the Red Sea also.
Okay, would you care to comment on the apparent reported sighting of a vortex in the Gulf of Aden?
A vortex. What's that? What's that? Is that something?
Apparently, WikiLeaks just released a whole bunch of new cables, and there is a Russian admiral that in 2000 reported that there was some type of vortex that was in the water. And recently you said, in the 6 months that you were there was only 3, reports of piracy.
No, when I was there, 3 successful piracy
successful.
attacks.
I see. What would be the motivation for the United States government to develop a place for, to combat piracy if there wasn't a lot of piracy going on, or there's not widespread piracy as them taking over a lot of ships and things like that?
Well, it's not that the increase in attacks is coming from. Let me ask. So the vortex, what the hell is that? Is that something from the Sci-Fi Channel?
Yeah, I guess this would be more of your conspiracy theory type stuff, but it was just very interesting. I read a report that there was some type of vortex in the water, and you said that you had experience in that area, that you've traveled all over the Gulf of Aden and things like that. I mean, I was just merely...
I can tell you in 6 months I never saw a vortex in the Gulf of Aden. And it's, I love that because actually I lived in the Mideast for 3 years, and conspiracy mindset abounds in the Arab world. They love it. I mean, it's part of the mother's milk of life over there, conspiracy theorists. And there's a system we have on ships called automatic information system. So it sends out, okay, it's kind of like, if you know what an IFF system is on there, it kind of does that thing. Well, I was with a nation's Navy, his senior officer, and he said, Admiral, the pirates can break into AIS. I said, well, I hope so. There's probably some high school kids that can break into AIS. It's not that secure. And I said, pirates don't use that. They just go to unsuspecting ships, or actually lazy ships. So the conspiracy thing is all over. It's just kind of part of the culture. However, what I saw in the Gulf of Aden was a lot of chemical tankers and electronic ships, a lot of things that said, Costco, which is the big China overseas corporation, and I saw a lot of fish, and I saw a lot of whales, and I saw a lot of sea turtles. They were all over the place. But I never saw a vortex. The Russians are. I'm one of the few admirals that's actually been able to engage at sea with the Russians and the Chinese, because I was on counter-piracy. And counter-piracy is kind of like soft puppies and warm kittens. Everybody likes it. And so we would, and in the United Nations, there's only 2 things that all 192 nations agree on. Piracy's bad and slavery's illegal. We disagree on everything else to some extent. So I was allowed to. I got with the Chinese 3 times. We went back and forth between ships. Got to go with the Russians, and the Russians, they kind of, I don't know if that admiral saw it or not. Maybe he did, or maybe it just came out that way. The Russians are always kind of, the way they talk makes it sound conspiratorial anyways. So is that what you thought, comrade? All I said was yeah. But they were very helpful to me, the Russians. So I talked about the vortex, and what you really wanted to know was about what again?
That was just...
No, the vortex, but what, you did ask another question on something? Well, if you remember, just...
I don't remember.
Why are we there? I think.
Oh, okay. Why we're there. Yeah, well, hey, here's why we're there. Because it's an important sea lane, and if you just let thugs take over an area, they will. And so, if you're not out there, because it does affect, it indirectly affects American citizens. If all those ships get pirated, nothing we order is going to get slowed down, but it will, because there's a trickle-down effect because of the Europeans. And more importantly, you can't shut down the Gulf of Aden because there's too many ships going through there. But if you leave this to unceded authority and let these thugs and murderers run the place, they will. That's what's happening in the geography of the space called Somalia. There's no functioning government. There's no legal system. And so it's a very awful place to live. And we're not going to allow that to happen on the high seas where we have the ability to operate. Well, go here.
I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to share, in your opinion, what are the 3 most strategic priorities that you can think of for the Navy in the coming 10 to 20 years, and then the 3 biggest challenges you expect to face?
Man, I didn't know I was going to get a test. You didn't tell me about that.
It's an essay.
It's an essay. It works.
Sorry, no multiple choice.
You know, I think the part of it is just keeping up with our technology and also making sure we're getting the maximum advantage out of it. Because sometimes we need to work smarter, not harder. So in between the years between World War I and World War II, the budget went way down for all over the place. And then we had but that was some of the biggest years of innovation for the United States Navy. So sometimes lack of money tends to make you a little bit smarter, and just the processes and how you do it. But that permeates in a lot of areas, and we also have to be very careful for, we have some friends in the world that don't always act like our friends. But that doesn't mean we have to go toe-to-toe with them. So we have to use our instruments of national power, which the military is only one. We also have, we have diplomacy, which works. It works. We have the information age, that kind of works, and we have our economy. We are the epitome, everybody wants to be like us. So our economy is, even though we've taken a little bit here, we're still pretty good here, and people look up to us. And the fact that our freedom here. People, I was just at Google a couple weeks ago, and there's a company named VMware there. And the head technologist, it's not a Google, it was a VMware, he's a Brit. And I said, hey, how did you get? He goes, you can't recreate this any place on the planet. Up there in Silicon Valley. It's just, that there's just you can't go to any other nation and have that type of technology. So we have to harness that. We also have to make sure, we do have to get some things aligned here and get our house in order, because our economic situation is a national defense crisis. Crisis might be too much of a heavy term, but we have to make sure that we can make it work there, and that's where we have to kind of work smarter, not harder. On the airplane flying in here, I read they had one of these outtakes of a book, and I can't remember the name, but it talked about aluminum. And the fact that the Emperor Tiberius, this craftsman had come to him and made him a plate of aluminum. And Tiberius looked at it and said, hey, that's pretty, what is this? He goes, this is more valuable than gold. Harder to get, and you can make it out of the earth. And Tiberius said, no kidding? And he's thinking, this thing will make all my gold worthless? And he killed the guy. Because he didn't want to devalue his gold stocks. And it took about 1,800 years before they figured out how to get bauxite and make aluminum out of it. And it's just aluminum's all over the place. There's only 2 more things that are more common: oxygen and silicon, and then aluminum. I didn't know that. But it's the process. They were saying in this article that Napoleon had a dinner, and instead, the people at the second table had gold utensils. The people at the head table had aluminum utensils because it was so valuable. And then about 50 years later, 2 French guys figured out how to do this electrolysis stuff, and now you have aluminum all over the place. So it's that type of thing where you don't want to make it so we got to work hard. There's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of great knowledge in this nation, and we just have to figure that out.
How would you say the Navy is assisting South Korea with the political tensions between South Korea, North Korea from on the ground as in the cyber world as well?
Yeah, I'm not as plugged in on the South Korea and the cyber. I can tell you I worked with South Koreans. I had them in my task force, and I was part of what I tried to do was work with the South Koreans because they're over there. They have a counter-piracy task force too, because what they do is they shepherd their ships, they convoy their ships through the Gulf of Aden, because they obviously a lot of their economy is dependent on that. But the South Koreans, they've been a great friend for a long time. I think by us being over there on the peninsula, by us having ships over there, by us, as you know, I don't know if you know right now, but it's in the news that the North Koreans are getting ready to launch a satellite, and that will go up, and that is obviously not intended to have another radio station up. It's meant to poke at people. It's meant to show force and say that they can do this. And I'm sure they'd like to show that they could threaten the west coast of the United States. So with that, United States Navy, getting one of my other hats on ballistic missile defense, we have a network set up so that we can track those things and see how it works. I'll go back here.
Mine's a little off topic of what we've been discussing, but it's something.
Does it include any of these things in the water, these vortexes or anything?
No, this is something that I'm pretty sure you should have the answer to, at least I'm hoping you do. I mean, I read the tabloids about a week ago that you guys are decommissioning the Enterprise after this most recent sortie. Is that true?
Yes, that is a true statement.
And then also the other question that I had is real quick, does the Navy have any plans to build another one? Don't build another Enterprise at least.
I don't know. I don't think we've. The USS Enterprise is the oldest ship in the United States Navy. She's over 50 years old. She's going on her last combat deployment. She's over there right now. And this will be her last one. Then we're going to retire. So she's the oldest commissioned ship in the world, I think. So 50 years old. So we've gotten a lot of value out of her. But ships don't last forever. We're going to bring her back. And then, yeah, there's a carrier production. You know, we're probably spreading them out, but the next one's a Ford, and then there's this, and then there's that. And so we're going to keep 12 aircraft carriers as the plan. I mean, there's going to be a dip of a year and a half. We're going to have 11 for a little bit, but they're still going to keep that because even you don't see, well, actually you see other nations, they're not saying aircraft carriers are obsolete. Other nations want to build aircraft carriers. So they're on, that is and it's more than just the aircraft off there, it's the whole system that goes around that. There's submarines and other ships and aircraft, and those are very good tools that just show a nation, you know, they can exercise what they need to do for their nation, and at the same time, keep the sea lanes and the open seas open for everybody, for the freedom-loving nations. How about there?
Hopefully it's not too off topic, but the Chinese have their first commissioned aircraft carrier, or they're working on it. How big of a threat are they going to be to Japan and to us in the future with them building a navy?
Japan is, or China, Japan's probably, I mean, they're very close there. And again, I'll give you a personal opinion. I'm not an intel analyst. That what they did, they bought a used Russian aircraft carrier. And, you know, when you see how they've been operating, they take it out to sea, they do this and that. It took this nation a lot of years to figure out how to operate off a carrier. And just having been an aircraft carrier pilot, landing on an aircraft carrier in day and night conditions, in bad weather conditions, with the seas moving, that's more than that takes a long time to do. However, the Chinese, their time frame, they're thinking about 2050, 2060. They're not thinking about the next budget cycle or the next football season. They have a very long range way to think they're doing. So when they came down by me, they had not had an out of area naval force since 1402. So it had been 600 years when Admiral Hu brought what was called the treasure fleet down then. He made it all the way to Somalia back then. And then they came back, and the emperor changed, and they burned all the ships, and they said, we're not going expeditionary anymore. So it's been 600 years. They have not had a, quote, true blue water navy. It's mainly been to protect, you know, their second, third island chain, kind of the way they look at the world there. they're still in Somalia. They've been there for 2-3 years now, working well. Good partner. They launched helicopters for me, very helpful. At the same time, some of their neighbors, if you're in areas where they dispute, they're kind of heavy-handed. I don't think the Vietnamese are very happy with them right now. I'm sure the Japanese are not happy with them now. You know, at some level, they control a lot of what happens in North Korea. Now, they say they don't, but it's there. So, I think China is going to be as you know, as the president said, that's going to be a focus going forward for us. I think that's a good thing. I think working with China is a good thing. I think you also just have to make sure that our interests are in there too, because right now they're, you know, especially when you get to some of the disputed islands and you get to some of the disputed areas for resources, China has not been a good neighbor to its neighbors over there in the Far East. How about right back in there?
I have a question about Somalia, so relating back to that.
Okay.
Everyone has cell phones. The other half of cell phones is cell phone towers. I can't imagine there's a whole lot of, like, you know, Verizon just hanging out saying, oh look, here's a cell phone tower, and then no one's trying to take that over or control that internet connection. So my question is, what state is the internet connection in there, and how readily available is it to the people with the cell phones?
Yeah, I don't know who you send your cell phone bill to for Verizon Mogadishu, but I do know that there's only 2 things that work in Somalia: cell phones and the distribution of this stuff called KHAT. K-H-A-T. It's this green leafy thing. You chew it, gives you buzz, mild narcotic. Can't grow it in Somalia because it's very arid. So you have to grow it in Ethiopia, Kenya, those type of places. And so Somalia is virtually in chaos, run by warlords, no government, none of this and that. When the COT aircraft comes in, it resembles a model of efficiency. People get out of the way, the airplane lands. You'd think this was a FedEx terminal. Everybody's here, you know, everybody stops at the stoplights, they're doing this, there's gate guards. It's amazing the efficiency for distribution of COT. Then they come out, get their cell phones, they transfer money over the cell phones, do this, and then airplane flies away, and then the country dissolves back into utter chaos. So how that works, I don't know. I don't know who you send your cell phone bill to. But the people running there, the people who keep the majority of the people oppressed, make sure those cell phone towers up. That's who keeps them on, because they control the people. Even though people outside, you know, a lot of people rely on it, but the people that are the thugs, the people that are oppressing the people, they keep those cell phone towers up. Right there.
Big fan of the Navy.
Great, thank you.
I'm curious though how you explain to people the justification for having such a large and powerful Navy when we don't have any peer competitors. The rest of the world combined is smaller than our Navy.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's all relative questions. You know, you can say we don't have a peer competitor, but then we also, our nation relies on global reach. So the bottom line is, if the people of this nation decide that we only want to defend the Gulf of Mexico, then that's what we ought to do. I mean, you all here are my boss. You're the American taxpayer. You ought to do it there. But if we just want to protect, you know, California, the Gulf of Mexico, and Florida, we can do that, and you don't need as big a Navy as we have. If you know, but Britain is down to 21 ships in its Navy. That's what they just cut their Navy, because they're kind of a, you know, they're much less than they used to be. You can do that. It just depends on what the people in the nation want. You know, but we rely on free trade that goes to South America, to Africa, to the Far East, to Europe, and the free exercise of them. So, and do we have to do it? No, we don't have to do it. But there would be some severe consequences if we weren't in all those areas. And I can, you know, as an American, I can say, we haven't, you know, I'm sure other people could disagree, but we don't abuse our power. I mean, we are pretty gracious in how we could do a lot of bad things in this world if we wanted to, and we don't. We are, one of the most heartening things, getting back to a piracy thing, is there was a ship that was taken, and I can't remember the nation, it might have been South Korea, I think it was Far East, and so what they've done, they hold up in a room and it's called Citadel. So you get in a safe room on a ship if you have it, so they bar themselves in, and the pirates, so there's about 6 or 8 pirates on there, and they'd attacked, and they couldn't get into the safe room. And in the safe room they could communicate out. Well, they said, hey, we're safe down here, we're doing this, and we had a ship over there with United States Marines that was trained in opposed boarding, meaning there's people on there with guns and they might shoot at us. Where I didn't have that capability, I was more compliant boarding. Well, so the Marines came on right before sunrise during this, and they got the pirates, and with no struggle per se. And then they went down to release the crew. Okay, it's okay to come out. And they wouldn't come out. And then they got in there, hey, no kidding, you can open the door. And they wouldn't do it. So then they go down, so then they have to go, and nothing happens quickly in the Gulf of Aden. So this is hours. And so then they had, hey, okay, Phil, go back to ship and get a blowtorch. And so they go back and get a blowtorch, and they cut a hole in the door. They're still not coming out. And so one of the Marines rips off his Velcro American flag and hands it through. And only then did they open the door, because they trust this nation. So no matter, you know, we take a lot of heat, maybe we've done some things, okay, that aren't the best in the world. And you can say some things there. But most other nations highly respect our values, our culture, the freedom we have, and how we treat our people. Paid political comment by the United States. How about right back in the green shirt?
My question is directed for the cybersecurity. I read in magazines, I read that there's a growing concern with the DoD, the DOJ, and the DOE that we've been buying before made software and hardware that can contain malicious code. I was wondering, what's your thoughts on that?
I think you need to graduate from here so you can help fix that. Yeah, because I'm not as much a code guy as more of a, you know, the networking piece. Because some of those are, you know, the software side's a lot different from the infrastructure side. But that being said, I think we're smarter than the other guys and than the bad guys, and we can figure those type of things out. So there's malicious codes. There's people can put bot, and we know a lot. But where we have is we can protect our Department of Defense networks. We know how to defend those. Where the policy question in the United States here is, can and should we protect the national infrastructure? Water, power, all those other types of things. You know, when you put it in the vernacular of the Navy and the Air Force, the Navy just doesn't protect Navy ports on the seaboard. It protects the United States coastline. And if you've seen or heard General Alexander, who's the commander of Cybercom, he wants us to be able to protect all our nation, not just the military. Because if something really bad happened at Palo Verde nuclear plant, and General Alexander can't go to the nation and say, hey, but all the military networks in Arizona were protected. You know, that's not the answer. And so that's kind of where we're going. Right there.
One more question.
One more question? Okay.
There must be other areas of the world that piracy is a problem. Can you tell us?
Yeah, it's kind of that piracy is a problem in other areas. Again, piracy is a very well-defined legal term. It has to beyond your national shores 12 nautical miles. So a lot of times people call it piracy, it's maritime crime. It's people going stealing stuff off sailboats in the Caribbean. It's people go, there's off the coast of Nigeria, where they go to some of the oil platforms and murder people and just steal all their money. You know, some of that is, but the piracy piece is kind of spotty, except Somalia provides a safe haven where there's no governed space, and there's not many places like that on the planet. So that's why Somalia gets the biggest piece. There used to be a lot of it down in the Straits of Malacca, but it started getting much, much more. So Singapore, Thailand, and Indonesia, and Malaysia, they had a 2 or 3 year concerted effort, and that was in the early 2000s. That used to be the hotbed of piracy, and then they did away with it because you have a nation state that, you know, controls those waters and can do it. Hey, thank you all very much. I'll try to school up and get that vortex question answered. Hey, before I go, I'd like to present you with a coin. I appreciate it, because I'm expecting you to send a couple of these great graduates here to support the United States Navy in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.